How many teams will be buyers tomorrow? How many teams will be sellers? Will it be an active deadline? Jared Diamond covers Major League Baseball for the Wall Street Journal, and he joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. As Jared, we got just one trade deadline. It's tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Do you feel that will be a lot of activity based on the one deadline? How will that play into tomorrow at 4 o'clock?
I wouldn't get too excited about much happening. I don't expect very much to happen. I think it's going to be a pretty boring day, and that's because there aren't a lot of sellers. That's really the big problem. You look at the standings right now, and there's 3 or 4 teams in baseball that we know are amazing. It's the Yankees, Astros, and Dodgers. There's a few teams at the very bottom that are terrible, and then there's gigantic mush in the middle. You named a lot of those teams in it, like San Francisco and Arizona and all these teams that are sort of hanging around at 4, 5, 6 games out of the wild card spot, which is too close to start trading players, but too far away to start trading prospects to add players. And therefore, I think you're going to see a lot of teams just sort of standing pat, and not many teams that will seem very interested in sort of rising up to that next level to really compete for one of those wild card spots.
Jared, what about the Yankees? Because to me, I can't imagine being Brian Cashman, seeing my team have to go to Minnesota and win every game by a football score, and then come play the Red Sox and lose the first 2 games by a football score, and think that I can just stand pat and not bring in a starting pitcher. They are the Yankees.
Well, the Yankees desperately need a starting pitcher. I think they've shown over the last week or so just how difficult it will be for them to win the World Series with the starting pitching that they currently have, which means that they have to find a way to get better. Now, I thought Marcus Stroman was an obvious choice for the Yankees. Mm-hmm. He obviously got snatched up from under them by their crosstown rivals in Queens. So the Yankees are now sort of scrambling, looking for somebody. And you wonder who that name is going to be. You know, Robbie Ray is potentially available from Arizona. Zach Wheeler is potentially available for the Mets. There aren't that many big-name pitchers that are really out there. It doesn't look like Madison Bumgarner is going to be traded with the Giants just 2.5 games out of a wild card. Trevor Bauer is another name we've heard all season as a potential trade candidate. Well, the Indians are currently comfortably in a wild card spot and only 2 games behind the division. Are they now going to go and trade perhaps their best pitcher? Very likely not. So I think for any team that wants to buy, they have to be willing to pay a lot, to give up a lot in terms of prospects, because as we sit here today, this is a seller's market. If you are a team that have people to sell, you could command a pretty penny for them because you don't have a lot of competition.
And that's, if I can follow up, that's why I brought them up, Jared, because they're in the past a team that has never really been afraid to even buy high, even if it meant giving up pretty good prospects. So knowing that they need that starting pitcher and knowing that the market demands you're going to have to overpay, I can't – do you see them just not coming out of this with nothing?
I'd be very surprised if they do nothing. I think they'll do something. Uh-huh. The question is what, and is it going to be that big name that Yankees fans want? Look, they are willing to go out and get players, but they've also been very, very careful with their prospects in recent years. You know, you think back to a couple of years ago when the Yankees had a chance to acquire Justin Verlander at the trade deadline. They decided not to, and the Astros ended up getting him at the end of August. That was because the Yankees didn't want to trade prospects to get Verlander. And you sort of sit here now and wonder, would they have another ring if they had gotten out and gotten someone like Justin Verlander? So is Brian Cashman going to be willing to part with some big-name prospects? We know Clint Frazier seems like he's going to be available. I don't know if that really constitutes a big-name prospect at this point. In fact, it seems like the Yankees almost are hoping to get rid of Clint Frazier.
Jared Diamond, Wall Street Journal, covers Major League Baseball. Madison Bumgarner, Edwin Diaz. You got those 2 names at the top. I guess Syndergaard. Do you anticipate that any of those big names will be someplace else tomorrow after 4?
I don't think Madison Bumgarner goes anywhere. I think they're just too close to the postseason to trade away someone like Madison Bumgarner. The Mets, that's a more interesting conversation. You know, to me, the Mets are a team that you would think would sell, being where they are. They're 5 games under 500, 6 games out of a wild card. Then they went out and made a trade for Marcus Stroman, which, at least at face value, makes very little sense especially if they follow it up by now just trading Noah Syndergaard. Why do you buy Marcus Stroman and then trade Noah Syndergaard? It doesn't really make much sense. I think Zach Wheeler is a more likely trade candidate because he is a free agent at the end of the year. So I think it's very possible Zach Wheeler's on a different team by 4 o'clock tomorrow.
What was the message from Philly yesterday, if any? I mean, was that just, hey, you're willing to give us something that's better than anything we have for nothing? Or are the Phillies kind of in a spot where, hey, we're one back, we went out and spent a lot of money this offseason, we've got to get creative because we don't have a lot in our organization, but let's get what we can?
Yeah, the Phillies starting pitching has been a real problem lately, and Jason Vargas, it's not a very sexy name, but he's pitched well this year. In fact, he's pitched better than virtually all of the Philly starters, at least most of them. So he's certainly an upgrade. Is it enough to swing a wild card over to the Phillies? I'm not sure. I don't know if that's really enough, but at least they're doing something and trying to get better because there's a lot of competition for that National League wild card right now. You know, they're a game behind. They're tied with the Brewers. There's a lot of teams who are vying for those two spots. And I at least give the Phillies credit for saying, all right, let's just go do something. We know this is a move we can make. It's not going to cost us very much. And maybe Jason Vargas gives us one more win in one start that we would have lost without him.
And that's solid reasoning, especially with even in one wild card game, it could come down to a good relief effort or a start. I'm wondering if there's a bat that gets moved in the next 30 or 24 hours or so, Jared. Who might that be?
Yeah, I think Texas is a team that you might see look to start dumping some pieces. They seem to have fallen out. Mm-hmm. They're 6.5 games back of the wild card. They have some nice pieces. Hunter Pence has been a real revelation this season with what he's done. I think it seemed like his career was over, and he was an all-star this year. So I could see him potentially being traded. Some of those other hitters on Texas, they have quite a few of them. Nomar Mazara is one. They have a few. So they could get – I think that's a possibility, a team that seems out of the race. And Pittsburgh, I think, is another team that could now, I think, finally is willing to acknowledge they're not going anywhere. They're almost in last place in the National League.
Talk with Jared Diamond, Wall Street Journal. The trade deadline tomorrow, 4 o'clock. And obviously, we got in the National League, I think the last time we talked, the Dodgers are just pulling away. But in the East, Braves, Nationals, is that something to keep an eye on? Those two teams are playing. The Nationals still playing very good. So does it look like that the National League East might be a little bit more interesting than we thought maybe 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, those teams are playing each other right now. The Nationals won last night. Look, if the Nationals sweep this series, they're only 2.5 games behind, and all of a sudden it's a race. The Nationals have played amazing. I think they have the best record in baseball since Memorial Day. If not the best, the second best. They have been stunning in how they've turned things around. It's really a great story what they've done after losing Bryce Harper, seeming like their window was closed, and all of a sudden storming back. So I think this is a big game between those two teams just this week as we head into August. And certainly at 4.5 games back, you can't quite, at least today, say that the Braves have that division locked up, especially if the Nationals take care of business today and tomorrow.
Do you think the Phillies, when you look at them, do they have enough knowing how well Washington has played and seeing what Atlanta has done to kind of bridge the gap and then pass them? Do you think the Phillies, by just getting Vargas and maybe if they make a moderate move here, can really elbow their way back into the conversation?
Look, they're only one game out of the wild card, so they're certainly in the playoff conversation. The division, going to be trickier when you're 6 games behind and have two teams to jump over, but certainly the Phillies are a team that has sort of been hanging around a postseason spot all year long. There's no reason why they shouldn't be able to stay in that conversation. I do think they could benefit from really more pitching. I just don't know if there's enough out there for that to really materialize, especially because, like I said, the Phillies have a lot of competition for wild card too. I mean, the Brewers, you could argue, have underachieved this year, and they're tied with the Phillies right now. So it's going to be a really interesting 24 hours.
It will. And, a lot of people wonder if being that wild card team is even considered a success. Like, if you're the Phillies and you stare at yourself in the mirror, do you say, I'm going to unload to add pieces? Or do you look at yourself in the mirror and say, we're really not ready yet. Maybe we should try to sell a piece off or two and play for next year.
Well, what you're discussing right now is, in many ways, I think it's an issue in baseball. It's certainly a big topic of conversation. You had a GM in Arizona's Mike Hazen last week come out and essentially say what you said, and that's the wild card is not enough of an incentive to really go for it. And I understand that. They're probably right. Sort of from a very cold, calculating way of looking at it, yes, the opportunity to maybe play in a one-game playoff is probably not enough to mortgage any of your future. However, if you are a fan of one of those teams, it's very hard to hear from your GM, I think, that, hey, yes, we're only 3 games out of a playoff spot, but we're not going to make an effort to get there. It's not worth it to us. And again, I understand both sides of it. I know GMs, their job is to build sort of sustainable winners and to make smart decisions. However, being a sports fan and loving sports is not rational. And sometimes there's value in just going for it. If you're a Giants fan today, you have been given this incredible gift of a late summer where your team is actually relevant when it looked like they were going to be horrible. And if they end up selling pieces, to me, that's a bit of a slap in the face to Giants fans saying, don't worry about these great memories we could have given you in August and September of this year. We have to trade the most beloved player in our franchise, so maybe we could make another run of the playoffs 3 years from now. It just doesn't sit well with me, even while I understand sort of one side of the logic behind it.
Yeah, these teams are in a tough spot. They have 25 hours to decide what they are, in or out. Jared Diamond from the Wall Street Journal. You had a piece about the robot umpires, which is gaining some steam. The Atlantic League is doing something here, and you wrote a big piece on this and talked to catchers and umpires about it. What is some of the feedback, and do you think this is something that is more realistic than maybe we thought 2 years ago?
No, it's absolutely realistic. In fact, I think eventually we're going to see it in Major League Baseball. I'm not saying it's going to be next year or even 3-4 years from now, but I do think we will see it. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if we see it in minor league baseball, affiliated minor league baseball, as soon as a year or two from now. There's no doubt that this is something that baseball wants. They believe it could be good for the game. You know, ball strike calls are still sort of the biggest source of arguments between players and umpires. The question was always the technology. Is it good enough? And we're now seeing in the Atlantic League that so far, it's only been a few days since it's officially been rolled out, but so far it seems to be going pretty well. You know, it calls something more similar to the rule book strike zone, which is not necessarily what human umpires have called in recent years. So that will take some adjustment, but it is certainly consistent. And you can't say that necessarily about even Major League umpires.
All right, check that piece out. Jared Diamond on Twitter, and he has it at the Wall Street Journal. Now calling balls and strikes, robot umpires. Very good. Atlantic League, which was an area we used to have an Atlantic League team here, so a lot of our listeners familiar with that level of baseball. They are testing this out, and the robot umpires. So tomorrow, 4 o'clock, trade deadline. We'll see if something shakes up here locally and, of course, all throughout baseball as the trade deadline is here. Jared, we appreciate your time, pal.
Anytime, thanks.
All right, Jared Diamond here on the Sports Bash Boardwalk Honda Hotline.